presentation of Shadrack. I'll give a quick wrap-up of your presentation, Sparkle. So you began with the firm administrative support of your president in the president's note that digitization of heritage and the introduction of records management systems was introduced as a presidential note. So it's a firm confirmation of the government. And then you give a perfect example of how to get your house in order with a picture. Sometimes a picture will tell the whole story. It's very recognizable in the Caribbean world. And you introduce an 8-step plan via the Dirk's manual, start small. And the introduction of a digitization or records management system will be in step 5 or 6 or later on. So you have to do 4 preparatory steps like an institutional analysis, an analysis of business activities, record keeping requirements, and an assessment of existing systems, etc. I will come to this just before our question and answers session. Thank you very much, Sparkle. It's very enlightening and very recognizable.
Thank you.
So we go to Shadrack Venson, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Max. Very much appreciated. And I want to say, Dumela, back to you. You know, Nelson Mandela, the former president Nelson Mandela, he said, if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. And if you talk to a man in his language, that goes to his heart. So that's what I was saying to you. I am delighted when you use my language. I will go straight into the presentation and, of course, extending greetings to all from this side of the world. I am Shadrack Venson. I am an employee of the United Nations headquarters here in New York. I am also a PhD student at the University of South Africa. I will not be speaking on behalf of the United Nations, even though, of course, I may draw on the experience there, but I will mostly like to speak from my experience as a student, what I am seeing, what I am reading, and share with you on those. The title of my presentation is Information Governance Approach, which is a strategy for governance of information resources in the digital age. I want to talk briefly, of course, about the record keeping challenges. What are the challenges that we see as archives and records management professionals in the digital age? And then after that, I want to introduce or to bring in what I think is a solution or a viable solution, which is IG and the IG approach. But before that, of course, a quick introduction of the main topic, digital age. So here are the objectives. The objectives are to discuss some of the challenges from the perspective of archives and records management. I want to, as I mentioned, introduce IG as a solution, a viable solution, which is working in the field as already reported. Now, what is the digital age? How do we see it? What is the impact? There are several impacts that we see and are widely reported. One of them is the increasing access to technological devices. That is a direct impact that we see or that we feel brought about by the digital age. Now, don't be confused by the numbers there. They are just reports from those who are in the business of monitoring and following this technological developments. And some of them include Gartner, they include Forbes, they include Cisco, and from time to time they share with us what is happening. And this is what they confirm, that there is an increase in smartphone sales that grew 6% worldwide. Smartphone penetration rate has also gone up by 78%. Statista, which is also a platform that manages data penetration, monitors technology, it is forecasting an increase of users on a smartphone by 2025 to be 85%. Mobile networks will also
So let me check something again. I'll look at
I think there's interference.
right here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay, by 2022, mobile networks will support more than 8 billion personal mobile devices. That is a report by Cisco. So this, in general, indicates or points to an ever increasing access to technological devices. And of course, technological devices are different. The most common ones are cell phones or mobile phones. Now, these devices are the ones that collect and or gather data. You know that there is a lot that we do with mobile devices, pictures, location, we post, we report our location, we report on many other things, events, and a lot of other things that are personal, business. And so there is really no limit nowadays on what technological devices are reporting. So you can already guess what their increase means. It already directly translates to increase in the data that is being produced. The second point is affordability of internet access. Now, internet access has become much more affordable across the world. Again, these are reports by those who are following or who are leading the industry. Google is investing $1 billion over 5 years in Africa to support what they call digital transformation in the region, including a subsea or undersea fiber cable to increase internet speeds. The initiative is an extension of a project called Project Link. I invite you to Google that name to learn more about what Project Link is, how did it originate, what are its objectives, what are they trying to achieve. But of course, the main message there is to increase accessibility to internet, because when they increase access and affordability rather, more and more people will create data. More and more people will create data. And it is the data, the resource called data, that Google and others are looking for. It is the feed into the big data industry that we are, or that they are looking for. So look at that Project Link, which started in Uganda. That is a country in East Africa. Project Link has since expanded to more than 1,600 kilometers of fiber networks within 5 cities. This is in East and West Africa. So Ghana is in West Africa, Uganda is in East Africa. So it has extended from the west to the eastern parts of Africa and covering many cities and villages and rural areas. And again, the bigger the access or the more the access, the more the data that is being produced. So this is what we see, affordability of internet access. So Project Link was expanded and now it is called C-Squared. Google again to read more about those projects and how they affect the lives of people and how internet access has become even much more affordable, even to people who are the poorest, who cannot afford 3 meals a day or let alone 1 meal a day, but some of them do have access to internet. That is the politics side of it. This is just a screenshot from that C-Squared. And of course, again, you can Google and have a look at the cities that it has covered. It has covered countries in East and Western Africa. Uganda and Kenya are in East Africa. Liberia and Ghana are Francophone Western side of Africa countries. And it is expanding to even more countries in Africa. Now, the third aspect or impact of this phenomena of digital age is the data explosion. We are experiencing voluminous amounts of data like never before. Again, as I mentioned, it is because of the increase of devices, sensors, and devices that collect data. It is because of the increase of the network or the increase to the access to data or internet rather, the affordability of internet that causes data explosion. And of course, it is data and information explosion. So the numbers there again, the summary of all those reports from different sources is that there is an ever increasing data. We are in a pool of data to deal with as records and information management professional. The total amount of data globally is forecast to increase rapidly. And now we are talking zettabytes, which are much, much bigger numbers to deal with. It is forecast to increase. The forecast started way back in 2020 through 2022 to 2025. You can see the increase there from 64 now through to 2025 is 150 zettabytes. By 2025, IDC predicts that the total amount of data created worldwide will be 163. So there is, as I mentioned, generally, all these are pointing to a rapid increase in the amount of data that people are producing. And it means the amount of data that organizations, that business, that governments have to deal with. And some may say not all of us or not all governments are prepared or were prepared to deal with 10 of events. The fourth and last point that we see, which is an impact of digital age, is what researchers call digital colonization, digital colonialism. You are all familiar with the term colonialism. You are all familiar with the terms, associated term called scramble for Africa. And this is what they are relating to, but it is happening in the digital environment. Hence, it's termed digital colonialism. What is digital colonialism? This is a scenario where large-scale technological companies extract large-scale technological companies extract and own data for profit and market influence. And of course, with nominal or very little benefit to the data source. Let's take that and try to unpack it to understand what it means. It is a scenario, by the way. It is the reality today, what is happening. Now, what is large-scale tech companies? Who are they? And here we are talking about Facebook. We are talking about Google. We are talking about Apple and others. There is another big one called Cambridge Analytics. Not long ago, we listened to US Congress interviewing the owner of Facebook. You all know him, Mr. Mark Zuckerberg. He was interviewed. I had the pleasure to listen to that interview, which was very revealing, and was telling us a lot of things about how they collect data, how they store data, what are the risks, and how data end up being used maliciously in instances where the politicians used it, where bad players used it, how this data is vulnerable. And of course, they were talking or asking him a lot more things that relate to governance of data, relate to accountability of those who collect data. But the thing that I picked was what I mentioned before, that there are data sources. And then there are those who are using the data, who are harvesting the data. Now, digital colonization is that scenario where data sources are available in Africa, freely available, one might say, and large-scale tech companies are scrambling to make sure they harvest or they collect that data. And they do that by what? By, of course, making accessibility to the internet wide and affordable, because then the data digitally comes over to those who have the power to pull the data through fiber networks and other virtual networks. So therefore, that is why we call it colonization, because the colonization that happened in the 19th century, Western powers moved in physically to occupy lands in Africa, as you might know. Hence, we have Anglophone Africa and Francophone Africa. So they moved in physically. Now, in this case, they are doing a virtual scramble. They are doing a virtual digital colonization of data resources, and they harvest this data without any limit in many cases because of poor legal infrastructures for data privacy. And what do they use the data for? They use the data, what is the profit for? To make products and services. And they monopolize in many instances. As you know, Apple devices are a form of a monopoly. So who are the data sources? These are the combined populations of the global north. And of course, the global north includes Africa and Asia and all parts of the developing world. So digital colonization is a virtual colonization, but the same dynamics as seen during the colonial period that I explained in the 19th century, where raw materials were collected or harvested, and minerals were taken away from the source and taken away to those who have the power, and processed and then sold back as finished products to those consumers at very high price. But where it came from, the sources did not benefit, or in some instances hardly benefited anything. We are seeing a repeat of the same pattern. And this what researchers call digital colonialism. I invite you to read a study by Kuhlman 2023, which expands more in detail on this phenomena. What are the challenges to record keeping? My colleague Sparkle has talked about the challenges, and of course she was discussing challenges from the record keeping perspective, which I will also touch on. One of the challenges that we see as challenges to record keeping, and of course in the context of the digital age, is that records management seem to be insufficient, or really it is insufficient on its own to fulfill the information needs of an organization. What is the information needs? The information needs have become more diverse and out of the scope of the traditional records management as we know it, which was predominantly paper-centric. Now there is needs for records and information managers to advise or to lead on how to manage social media records, on how to manage blockchain records, on how to manage data. And therefore, the records management, in some instances, researchers are arguing that it falls short and needs to be complemented. I invite you also, as I mentioned, I am sharing from my review of the literature as a student, as I investigate the literature. And there I'm sharing that point from a research by Brooks, which was the perspectives on the relationship between records management and IG. The other challenge is that technological developments leading to media obsolescence. Media obsolescence, which is software and hardware obsolescence. This I want to believe you're all too familiar with to some extent. You are all familiar with flash disks or thumb drives, or even 3.5 floppy disks that we used to use, or diskettes that we used to use to store information that are no longer available for use. And you are all aware of how we were required, or we are still even today required to migrate. Now, migration is a solution that is put forward in different forums. I believe in forums in the ICA, they propose migration strategy. In Inter-Paris, another forum where they look at challenges of record keeping, they also propose or recommend rather migration of information resources, data migration into more stable storage medium. This is in order to deal with a consistent challenge, and the challenge is obsolescence, the obsolescence of software, the obsolescence of hardware. I can only imagine now how it is becoming even more complicated with the advent or the increasing use of machine learning or AI, how this is becoming even more of a challenge. And we know that migration is easier said than done. In many cases, migration itself is a costly undertaking. Migration itself has got inherent challenges. And some of the challenges that are common includes, of course, data loss. When you migrate, you suffer a degree of data loss. RIM professionals, records and informational professionals lack the skills for digital record keeping. The argument there is that in many instances, records managers are behind the learning curve. The other thing is records management seem to be synonymous with the paper era. This to me speaks to the political scheme of things in an organization. We know in many instances, government, public sector, and private sector, records managers do not enjoy the best image. They don't enjoy the top position, the decision making, strategic position. They are in the back office or the operational in many cases, and that is what the image is, and that is the going or the common image of records management. It is because it was perceived or the discipline developed where in the paper era, back then when paper records were the predominant sources of information. And therefore that in this era or in the digital age is a challenge that we have to face today. And as such, there is often exclusion at the decision table when decision makers, strategic makers in the business are discussing strategy on information management. You find only legal, you'll find data or IT governance, but often they leave out records managers and archivists. To me, that is a challenge. Again, it is broadly discussed in the literature by Brooks. I want to share more on the point about archives and records management. Professionals lack the skills for record keeping, and when I said they are behind the curve. Interpares, which I mentioned, is an international initiative developed from University UBC in Canada, and it is undertaking research on long-term preservation of records, and it is advising governments and other entities on long-term preservation of records. And from time to time, they give out guidance, reports, findings, and this is one of them where they conducted research in 38 African countries. And the research showed that there is a gap in the skills for records managers. There is a gap to deal with digital records management. So I'm bringing this to, of course, to support and show that indeed recent research indicate from the empirical data collected, show that indeed there is a big gap that needs to be closed in order for records and or for archives and records management professionals to better deal with the challenges posed by digital records or by digital age information resources. In 2019, University of South Africa, UNISA undertook to evaluate and recalculate to change the curriculum of its postgraduate program in archives and records management to align with the skills needed. This is, of course, in response to a realization that there is a misalignment of the needs and the curriculum, that the records managers or the archives and records management professionals lack the requisite skills to lead or even to guide, to provide advice on business needs to meet the requirements of today's digital age, and they found that to be problematic, and therefore moved quickly to align the curriculum, which is what they call recurriculate. The archives and records management professionals, of course, we continue that they lack the skills that are behind the curve. And these are some of the skills that are lacking in many. And of course, again, this is coming from the research or from the literature rather that I mentioned or that I shared before from Interpares and from UNISA, that the skills on data curatorship and management are lacking. Digital records forensics, we have very few of those or people with those skills. Archival diplomatics, data engineering, data science skills, information privacy and security. All those are skills that are required by the business of information management professionals to possess in order to advise on information management. Now, I want to switch on to the topic of information governance, IG, which, as I mentioned, is a viable solution to address the challenges that have been identified above. But quickly, what is IG? IG is a subset of corporate governance. And corporate governance sits at the top of the organizational structure or the organogram, the organizational charter, the constitution of the organization, the charter. That is where corporate governance is. So there you will also find IG, which means IG sits right at the strategic place, strategic level, the governance of the business. Of course, the basic principles of corporate governance are known. They are accountability, transparency, fairness, responsibility, and risk management. Now, we want to emphasize that before IG programs and facets can be deployed, the landscape or the mechanism of corporate governance must be understood. That means the role and responsibility of every department, every key stakeholder within the corporate setup or governance of the organization, the roles and responsibility of every key player or stakeholder must be fully understood so that to increase the chances of the IG program. Now, there is a conceptualization of the IG concept. That is a conceptualization of how we conceive or how we conceptualize rather, how we perceive the IG concept. Now, it is seen as a pie with sectors or facets, all forming part of the unified governance. And there you can see it's a structure, a governance structure. All information stakeholders are part of this big pie. We have RIM, Records and Information Management. There we have IT, we have legal, we have risk, privacy and security. We also have business. They are all part of the framework. It's a framework approach where you have an umbrella which deals with the topic of information in all forms, types, social media, data, anything, structured, unstructured data, it all forms under the purview of this framework. we want to now demystify or clarify some things about IG, because I know some people may know bits and pieces of what it is and what it is not. So let's talk about that. IG is not a replacement of records management practices or discipline, as many might think. It is not, as we have seen in the previous slide. Records management is a part and parcel of the IG framework. So it is not replacing, it is complementing and bringing records management professionals to the fore, to the table, to the strategic, from the operational to the strategic level, because of the critical position that records management plays in an organization. Records management is a valued part of a wider information landscape. That is why it is part of the IG framework. IG is not IT governance. There is IT governance, which is particularly focused on managing IT or information technology, hardware and software, IT artifacts. Just like records and information management, IT is a valued part of the information governance framework. So they have the same level, they have the same position when it comes to the view from the IG framework. Governance of information is through, governance of information through legislation is not new. One might think IG is a brand new concept. Of course, the name information governance might be brand new, but look deeply into governance itself of information. It is not new. This is building blocks to what has already been there. We already, or many countries already have some form of legislation or governance on how to manage information, on how to manage access to information to start with. Many organizations, many rather governments have the constitution, which is a legislation that manages or that governs the right to information. It governs who can collect information in many cases. We also have National Archives legislation, which is common in many countries, which is legislation that governs records and information and access. We also, in some countries, have what they call freedom of information legislation, which again is legislation that governs access or the right to access to information. Of course, now we even have data privacy legislation, which governs data. We have, as you know, the common one for European countries, GDPR, which governs access and use of data about citizens of the EU. So IG is not really new. It's building blocks to what has been there, of course, maybe operating in isolation and not coordinated in a way that it should be. But we want to demystify and say we are not, this is not bringing in or developing a new discipline from the scratch, as one might think. No, this is building blocks, bringing programs to what already has been there to some extent. Legislation is used widely to govern information. I mentioned that information access, use, and privacy. The practice of IG as a discipline came to the fore due to increasing requirements, legislative requirements, particularly on data privacy. Now, this is a development from increasing data that we see. We talked about data explosion.
So sorry, Shadrack,
Yes.
you have like 5 more minutes because we need to take a break. So
Okay.
let
me wrap it up. Try to wrap it up quickly. The practice of IG came to the fore because of increasing legislation and requirement for data privacy, and of course we make reference to GDPR. Now, what is the IG approach? The IG approach is a coordinated approach, as I already mentioned. It's a framework approach which compels organizations to take a broad, inclusive view of information issues from all perspectives of legal, IT, and records and information management. It's an integrated strategies. Key stakeholders are aligned together. They speak together. People from legal don't know anything about records and information management practices and principles, and therefore they need to be at the same table with professionals in information management. People from IT, they are not records managers or archivists, and therefore they need to learn from archives and records management professionals. Likewise, archives and records management professionals are not lawyers, and therefore need to fully understand in order for all stakeholders to work together. So IG brings all of them and align them to meet business goals. It's a collaboration. Government principle is applied. A charter that includes governance of information. So the charter or the constitution of the organization that includes information governance. Here is a very high level view of the information governance board or the framework and all those stakeholders represented. You see, we have legal, we have IT, security, privacy, risk, RIM, and business. Let me stop there, Dr. Griffiths, and maybe take a few questions for discussions. Thank you.